This is not a theoretical exercise. Right now, smoke is rising over the US 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. Video is flooding in from Manama's Juffair district. Eyewitnesses describe the sound of the Iranian Shahed drones as relentless, like a swarm of lawnmowers just outside their windows. This is a kinetic reality. Visual investigations are already confirming direct hits on critical SATCOM antennas. What you are watching is not just a tactical success, it's a catastrophic failure of a security architecture. The foundational math of America's trillion-dollar deterrence model has just been broken live, on camera. But to understand the numbers behind today's smoke, to truly grasp the architecture of a failure that was years in the making, we need to rewind the clock. Before the smoke, before the sirens, there was the Juffair district of Manama, Bahrain. A dense urban grid of steel and glass high-rises pressed tight against the turquoise waterfront. The hum of commerce, the five-star hotels like the Crown Plaza filled with off-duty officers and contractors, the endless flow of traffic, all the vital signs of a city thriving under the umbrella of American power. And right there, embedded in the center of it all, sat the nerve center. Naval Support Activity Bahrain. Headquarters, United States 5th Fleet. It was not a remote desert bunker.
It was a projection, an architecture of accessible, confident dominance, woven directly into the fabric of the city it secured. The building's function was pure military calculus, a command node for half a continent, but its location was a statement of uncontested superiority. This was its primary vulnerability, a symbol, yes, but also an address, a fixed coordinate on a map, inseparable from the civilian life around it, a fortress made of glass reflecting the afternoon sun. And from over 200 kilometers away, that reflection was the perfect aiming point. The validation of that aim point did not arrive with a bang. It began with a sound that did not belong over the skyline of Manama. It was the low, persistent drone of 1,000 lawnmowers in the sky, a mechanical grinding that grew from a distant annoyance into a suffocating, atmospheric hum, a low-cost sound closing in on $1 trillion target. Then, the physics of the situation asserted itself. The first sharp crack of an impact followed a half-second later by the blaring, panicked wail of air raid sirens across the entire Juffair district. Then another impact, and another. A rapid, rolling sequence of detonations, the concussions rattling the glass of every five-star hotel and luxury apartment building. This was not a single surgical strike. This was arithmetic. And from the heart of the American command and control node, the undeniable proof of the model's failure rose into the sky. Thick, black smoke. Plumes visible from every apartment balcony in Juffair. A public spectacle of vulnerability. The untouchable had been touched. The fixed coordinate had been serviced. But that smoke was not an epilogue. It was a signal fire. A signal that had just been seen in the markets that price risk for every barrel of oil passing through the Strait of Hormuz and every container ship navigating the Bab el-Mandeb. The math had not just changed for a single building in Bahrain. The math had just changed for the entire global economy. That change in the global economic equation begins here. The command node that went dark is not a simple naval base. It is the central nervous system for an operational area covering 2.5 million square miles of ocean and 21 nations. But its geographic footprint is a distraction. Its true leverage, the mechanism underwriting the stability of global markets, was its capacity to police the world's two primary energy arteries, the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The paralysis of these two chokepoints renders the third, the Suez Canal, a logistical dead end.
The jugular vein and its primary collateral vessel were just severed. To lose this command node is to lose the ability to guarantee safe passage. It is to turn off the tap for the 20.9 million barrels per day that transit Hormuz alone. The immediate effect is not a risk premium with no ceiling. That is amateur thinking. The reality is a violent repricing event. War risk insurance premiums for a single tanker voyage through the Gulf don't just rise, they jump from tens of thousands to millions of dollars in a single trading session, effectively freezing traffic. The Baltic Dirty Tanker Index spikes 500%, then 1000%. This isn't just about the price of oil. The contagion moves like this. First, the physical market seizes, then the paper markets break. The Brent futures curve inverts into the steepest backwardation on record, signaling an absolute panic for a near-term supply. The portfolios of energy producers may see a temporary sugar high, but the asset destruction elsewhere is catastrophic. Shipping lines like Maersk are functionally insolvent overnight. Industrials dependent on just-in-time components begin shutting down production lines. The fundamental insurance policy on global commerce has just been declared void, and the entire system is repricing that reality right now. All of this because the ability to guarantee the flow of nearly a quarter of the world's petroleum has evaporated. Which leads to the far more urgent and unsettling question: how could the most powerful, data-driven security apparatus ever built, an apparatus modelled and funded for this exact scenario, be rendered so blind? How was this even possible? The answer to that question is not found in the ordnance or the operational failures on the ground. The forensic analysis begins with the assumptions. This institutional hubris. For some US war planners, in their meticulously funded models, operated on a single core assumption. Any conflict with Iran would be a swift 4 to 5 day decapitation campaign. The objective was to fracture the command structure, causing the regime to collapse inward before it could ever mount a coordinated, sustained counterattack. This was a fundamental, catastrophic miscalculation. The entire multi-trillion-dollar deterrence architecture was built on a plan that never accounted for a determined, asymmetric response. It never factored in the arithmetic of 10,000 cheap rocks against a handful of expensive shields. That is the core pathology. The smoke rising over the naval headquarters at Juffair is not the signal of a battle lost. It is the physical proof that the foundational model of American deterrence was, and is, broken. The smoke proved the model was wrong. In your own domain, be it engineering, finance, or logistics, what is the smoke signal that tells you a core assumption has just fractured? Report your findings in the comments. But do not mistake this revelation for a conclusion. What happened at Juffair was not the attack. It was phase 1. It was the kinetic prelude to the real offensive, an offensive that is not aimed at ships, but at political will itself. This offensive against political will begins with a fundamental shift in targeting geometry. The objective is no longer the destruction of military assets, but the destruction of America's permission to operate. The theatre of war expands from the naval base to the city that hosts it. The drones no longer just target hardened shelters. They begin a systematic campaign against the symbols of Western presence in Manama. A strike hits the Crown Plaza Hotel. Another damages the IRA-used residential building. A third slams into the Breaker Tower. The message is not kinetic, it is political. It is designed to create a humanitarian crisis so severe that the government of Bahrain has no choice but to demand the Americans leave. The cost of hosting the Fifth Fleet has become too high. In Washington, the decision is made. The evacuation order for all non-essential personnel and military families is issued. A sterile, urgent message flashes across thousands of phone screens in expatriate compounds. But as bags are packed, the television is on. A news anchor's voice strained, reporting chaos from Bahrain International Airport. Then, the feed cuts to a live shot of the main runway. Smoke is billowing from the terminal. The graphic flashes across the screen. All flights grounded. In that same moment, a distant concussion rattles the window panes. The realization is absolute. The exit door is not just closed, it has been vaporized. These families are no longer residents, they are hostages, trapped in the very country they were ordered to flee. The world's attention, the entire command and control apparatus of the United States military, is now locked onto this single point of failure, a humanitarian crisis in a city on fire. This was entirely by design, because while all eyes were fixated on the smoke over Manama, the truly decisive attack, the one that would fracture American power itself, was already underway, hundreds of miles away, utterly unopposed. That decisive attack landed here, in the middle of the Indian Ocean. No explosions at a command node. No smoke rising from a warship. The target was something far more critical and far more vulnerable. An Iranian Qatar 380 missile struck a US combat support ship. This wasn't the Fist. It wasn't a carrier or a destroyer bristling with weapons. It was a floating gas station, a warehouse, the fleet's stamina. The strategic calculus was brutal and brilliant. Why try to break the heavyweight boxer's fist when you can simply cut off his water supply between rounds? Without fuel, without munitions, without parts, the Fifth Fleet's operational range, its very ability to project power, began to evaporate. The Fist was still there, but it was now tethered to a shrinking perimeter, its reach crippled by an attack on a target that never appears in recruitment videos. And at the same instant, the other pillar of American power was shattered. The myth of technological impenetrability. Over the Arabian Peninsula, an Iranian Fatah-1 hypersonic missile, accelerating to speeds between Mach 13 and Mach 15, simply bypassed the multi-billion-dollar THAAD and Patriot defense shield. This wasn't a failure of the system. It was a failure of the physics the system was built on. At 3 miles per second, with an unpredictable atmospheric trajectory, the weapon exists in a state where the defender's detect to engage sequence is longer than the threat's actual transit time. The shield was designed to stop arrows. This was a bullet that proved the expensive umbrella of security was, in fact, full of holes. A decapitated logistical chain. A pierced technological shield. These were not two separate lucky strikes. They were the synchronized expression of a single brutal philosophy of warfare. A new model designed to break a superpower, not by matching its strength, but by attacking its very architecture with asymmetric leverage. It has a name, and to understand what happens next, you have to understand the logic of the 10,000 Rocks Doctrine. The 10,000 Rocks Doctrine is not a military strategy. It is a theorem of attrition economics, sourced from a simple, brutal premise. You do not defeat a superpower with a rifle. You defeat it with 10,000 rocks. This is not warfare. It is a hostile economic takeover of the battlefield executed through a cost exchange function that guarantees bankruptcy. Here are the variables. On one side, a $35,000 drone. On the other, a high-end interceptor, an SM series or Patriot with a unit cost between $2 and $4 million. This creates a cost exchange ratio of over 100 to 1 against the defender. Now we run the calculation for the 10,000 rock scenario. 10,000 drones At $35,000, each represents a capital outlay of $350 million. To guarantee intercepts against that swarm, a defender might fire 2 missiles per threat. A standard doctrine. That is 20,000 interceptors. At a conservative average of $2 million per shot, the defender's cost is $40 billion. $350 million to launch the attack, $40 billion to defend against it. The United States procures perhaps 500 such interceptors in a good year. A single massed assault of this nature does not just challenge the defender, it consumes decades of production inventory. A second one fractures the entire deterrence model. The math is simple, and the math is brutal. This economic bleeding devalues the physical asset that was supposed to make it impossible. The $1 trillion capital commitment to secure the Fifth Fleet's operational zone. Think of it as a balance sheet item. A multi-decade investment creating an architecture of total spectrum dominance. Not just a carrier strike group, but the perpetual presence of one. A dozen warships, 70 aircraft. Not just abstract air defense, but layered Aegis destroyers at sea. Multiple Patriot batteries on Allied soil, and the overarching THAAD system protecting the command nodes. 250,000 personnel and billions in annual operating costs, all networked into a seamless grid. That entire architecture was built to own the sky. Iran just proved it could rent it for an afternoon with loose change. The smoke rising over the command node in Bahrain is not just smoke. It is a leading indicator. It is a signal of a fundamental repricing of risk that extends far beyond that shoreline. The question is no longer abstract. It is about your capital allocation. How do you reprice the security premium on every barrel of oil transiting Hormuz? What is the correct valuation for a defense contractor whose entire model is built on the $4 million solution, not the $35,000 problem? The evaporation of deterrence is not a military event. It is a cascading effect on every choke point, every supply chain, and every portfolio. To calculate that exposure, we must first calculate the true cost of that evaporation. The final calculation is a strategic trap, and its arithmetic is non-negotiable. Here is the hard metric. Intelligence confirms Iran can manufacture thousands of low-cost drones annually. The United States, by contrast, produces high-end interceptors in the low hundreds. At the burn rate demonstrated over Bahrain, America's missile stockpiles are not measured in years. They are measured in weeks. The persistence arithmetic is simple. Thousands of rocks thrown per year will always overwhelm a limited cache of gilded shields. This is not a solvent model for sustained conflict. This is not a forecast. It is a historical record, already written in the Red Sea. The 2023-2025 campaign against Houthi forces provided the real-world validation, where the US Navy expended nearly $1 billion in munitions to neutralize threats costing a fraction of that. The result was not victory. The result was a validated, unsustainable cost-exchange ratio that proves the model is broken. For the hard asset investor, the smoke still lingering over Juffair, the silent tankers waiting offshore, the trapped families inside the perimeter, is not a geopolitical event. It is a price signal. It is the leading indicator for a violent repricing of risk across all maritime choke points. The first derivative is the immediate spike in war risk insurance premia. This directly inflates freight rates, which in turn raises the landed cost of Gulf energy for global markets. The second derivative, the 15 to 50% permanent risk uplift, is the necessary adjustment you must now make to your own valuation models. It is an increase to the required hurdle rate for new capital deployment and a higher discount rate applied to future cash flows of any exposed asset. This is the true cost of deterrence evaporation measured on your balance sheet. The era of deterrence as purely a psychological contest is over. We have entered a new reality governed by quantifiable, persistent attrition. The crucial point is this: the attack was not a one-off decision. It was a pre-authorized directive, a cascade set in motion by a commander who is now no longer alive to call it off. This architecture removes the very possibility of de-escalation. There is no off switch. It hardwires persistence into the conflict, ensuring the attrition is sustained. That is why the psychological games are finished, and why the math, the cold, hard attrition math, must be recalibrated. If this analysis provides the clarity you need to navigate the new reality, subscribe for more essential early warning intelligence. Because the signals are already here, for those who know how to read them.